My name is Calvin Easterling, and last month my younger brother Wendell sold our father's 400-acre hunting land to a Delaware hedge fund for $1.2 million. He did it 31 days after we buried Daddy. He planned to hand me a $40,000 check at a country club brunch and call it my share. He had no idea our father walked into a small office in Petal, Mississippi in September of 1983 and signed one piece of paper that turned every acre of that land into something Wendell could never sell. I'm Calvin Easterling. I'm 58 years old. I've worked as a wildlife biologist for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks for 33 years. I've walked that tract of land more times than I've walked my own street. I know where the bobwhite quail nest in the broom sedge. I know the exact bend in Black Creek where my daddy taught me to read a smallmouth's shadow. Last month, my brother thought he was the smart one in the family. Last month, he found out our father was smarter than both of us, decades before any of this started. Before I tell you what happened at that brunch, I want to say this. If stories like this one find you at the right moment, subscribe. I share a new one every night, quietly, for people who already know what it's like to be the one who saw it coming and stayed silent anyway. And drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to the summer I was 11 years old when my daddy said something to me on a creek bank that I didn't understand until last month. It was July of 1977. My daddy, Roy Easterling, was 38 years old, USDA county forester, 6'2", smelled like Old Spice and pine resin no matter how recently he'd showered. We were standing in the shallows of Black Creek where it cuts through the eastern edge of our family land, the part that runs from the old logging road down to where the ground turns to cypress bottoms. I had a cane pole and a coffee can of red worms. He had a Pabst from the cooler and a Stetson pushed back on his forehead, and he was watching the water like the water was saying something important. He said, "Calvin, this land doesn't belong to me. I belong to it, and one day you'll understand the difference." I was 11. I thought he was being one of those quiet, philosophical kinds of drunk men, even though Daddy had quit drinking the year I was born and that Pabst was the third sip of his second beer all summer. I nodded the way kids nod. I went back to watching my bobber. The cicadas were so loud you could feel them in your jaw. The creek smelled like iron and leaf rot. There were yellow flies the size of dimes circling the back of my neck, and Daddy reached over without looking and crushed one against my shoulder with 2 fingers, the way he did 1,000 times in my life. That was the planted seed. I didn't know it then. I wouldn't know it for 48 more years. My brother Wendell came along when I was 4. He was the prettier one. Bright blue eyes, a head of blonde curls that turned the color of dirty straw by the time he was 12, and a smile that could get him out of every single thing he ever did wrong. Where I was quiet and slow and watched, Wendell talked. He talked his way through 4th grade, 8th grade, a junior year suspension, and a 1989 totaled Camaro that my father never made him pay back. Wendell went to Mississippi State for marketing. I went to Mississippi State for wildlife biology 2 years before him. He pledged a fraternity. I pledged nothing. He came home with a tan and a girlfriend named Reagan. I came home with calluses. I want to tell you about Wendell as a child, because the man you become at 54 is just the boy you were at 8 wearing better shoes. Wendell at 8 was the kid who would trade you his sandwich for your dessert and then tell the lunch monitor you stole his sandwich. He did it to me. He did it to our cousin Wade. He did it to a girl named Bonnie Faye Cosper in 3rd grade, and Bonnie Faye is now a judge in Pearl River County, which is a piece of Mississippi geography. Wendell should have remembered before he hired Brennan as his closing attorney, because Brennan went to law school with Bonnie Faye. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When Wendell was 10, he set fire to a hornet's nest in our daddy's tool shed on purpose to get out of helping me clean it. The shed burned down. Daddy's grandfather's hand-forged axe head was inside it. The axe head melted into a lump that Daddy kept on his workbench for the rest of his life. The lump just sitting there next to his coffee can full of nails. Daddy never punished Wendell for it. He just kept the lump on the workbench where Wendell would see it every time he came in to ask for the truck keys. I asked Daddy about it once when I was 14 and Wendell was 10 and the lump had been sitting there about 4 months. I said, "Daddy, why don't you throw that thing out?" He said, Son, some lessons don't need to be taught with a switch. Some lessons need to sit on a workbench and be looked at. I think about that lump of melted iron a lot now. I think Daddy knew exactly what he was raising. I think Daddy was already paying attention. My mama, Joanne, was the one who never figured Wendell out. Mama was a fourth-grade teacher at Petal Elementary for 31 years. She believed in the goodness of every child she ever met, which is what made her good at her job and dangerous as a mother. Wendell was her baby. Wendell was her bright spot. Mama would shave butter onto Wendell's grits because she said his blood ran cold and he needed extra fat. She would not have shaved butter onto my grits if my heart had stopped beating. She wasn't cruel about it. She just had a softness for the pretty one, the way some women have a softness for hummingbirds. When I was 17, I overheard my mama and my Aunt Doreen in the kitchen. They were canning peaches. I was supposed to be at football practice, but I'd come home early because my knee was acting up. Doreen said, "Joanne, you know that boy's going to break your heart." And my mama said, "Doreen, he's just spirited." And Doreen said, "No, sister. Calvin is spirited. Wendell is something else." I stood in the hallway with my hand on the doorframe and I listened to my own aunt see my brother more clearly than my mother ever would. I never told my mama I heard her. I never told Doreen I heard her either. But I remembered. Mama died of pancreatic cancer in 2009. It moved fast. She went from a fall checkup to a hospice bed in 71 days. Wendell came to the hospital twice in those 71 days. Twice, total. He sent a Hallmark card from Madison. Reagan signed it. I sat with my mama every night for the last 26 days of her life, and I read her the Psalms because that was what she asked for. And on the night she died, she squeezed my hand and she said, "Calvin, take care of your daddy. Don't let him be alone too long." Daddy was alone for 14 years and 4 months and 9 days. Just him and a blue tick hound named Sister in the truck and the land. Sister died in 2021. Daddy buried her under the pecan tree in the side yard with his own hands, in a rain so heavy the hole filled with water before he could get her into it. He called me that night. He said, "Calvin, the dog's gone." I said, "I'll come over." He said, "No, son, just stay on the phone a minute." So I stayed on the phone with my daddy for 41 minutes while he sat in his truck in his own driveway in the rain. We didn't say much. We just breathed. Daddy died on April 14th of last year at 81 of congestive heart failure in a hospital room in Forest General with me holding his right hand and Wendell on his phone in the parking lot wrapping up a call. Daddy's last words to me were not profound. He said, "Calvin, get my hat." He meant the Stetson. He wanted the Stetson on the bed with him. I went out to the truck and I got it. And I came back and I laid it on his chest. And he put his hand on the brim, and he closed his eyes, and he was gone in about 9 minutes. Wendell came in 12 minutes after. The first thing Wendell said when he walked in was, "Did he say anything about the property? I want you to sit with that for a second." My brother walked into our father's death and asked about the property. Had you ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, even when every part of you wanted to speak up? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you sat with it. The funeral was on a Saturday. There were 340 people there. My daddy was beloved by every forester, every game warden, every farmer with a pine plantation in 3 counties. The funeral home had to put folding chairs in the lobby. Wendell gave a eulogy that he had clearly written on the plane. He used the word legacy 8 times. He said, "Our daddy taught us the value of stewardship," which was a word I had literally never heard my brother use in 50 years of being alive. Aunt Doreen sat in the second pew and her face did not move for the entire eulogy. I watched her face. She watched Wendell. She knew. By Tuesday morning, Wendell had a realtor on the land. I want to be careful about how I tell you this next part, because I didn't know any of it for a while. I went back to work 3 days after the funeral. I was running a deer mortality survey down in George County, sleeping in a state truck, eating gas station pickled eggs, and not sleeping much. The survey was important to me. I was tracking a chronic wasting disease boundary that the department had been chasing for 6 years. I had a thermos of coffee, a clipboard, a GPS unit, and a 1996 Ford F-250 with 207,000 miles on it that smelled like wet dog and Hoppy's 9. That truck and that work were how I grieved. I walked 14 miles a day in the pine flat woods, and I thought about my daddy, and I didn't cry once until day 18, when a doe I'd been tracking by collar for 3 years showed up dead in a clearing of her own old age, and I sat down on a stump and I cried for both of them. Wendell, meanwhile, was driving up from his subdivision in Madison every weekend and walking the family land with men in press slacks and Salomon hiking shoes. He told me, when I asked, that he was just getting the property appraised for Daddy's estate paperwork. He said it the way he said everything, with that little exasperated lift, like I was being slow. The first time I noticed something was off, it was over coffee at the kitchen table in Daddy's house. Wendell had a yellow legal pad and was clicking a ballpoint pen against his teeth. He looked up at me, and he smiled, and he said, "Cal, I've been thinking." Daddy would have wanted us to be practical. Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. I sipped my coffee. I didn't say anything. I have what my wife Lila calls a patient face. She means I look stupid on purpose so people will tell me what they really think. Wendell took the bait the way he always did. He told me he had a friend through work, a guy named Brennan, who knew some folks who were in the market for recreational acreage. He said, "You know, Cal, that land is just sitting there. You and I don't hunt it the way Daddy did. It's an asset, not a memorial, and the timber alone is probably worth $500,000. I asked him how much. He said, the right kind of buyer would go $1.2 million all cash, fast close, no contingencies on title. He said that twice. No contingencies on title. I knew right then. I want you to understand this. I knew right then because my brother has been lying to me for 54 years, and I have known the exact pitch of his lying voice since I was 6 years old. When Wendell says, no contingencies on title, twice in a row, it means he's already promised somebody no contingencies on title, and he's already done something with the title to make that promise possible. I sipped my coffee. I said, well, that's something to think about. He smiled. He thought he had me. That night, I sat on the back porch of Daddy's house. The porch faces west. The sun was going down behind the pecan tree where Sister was buried. I could see the corner of the workbench through the open door of the shed. The lump of melted iron was still sitting on it. Wendell had not noticed it once in 31 days of coming and going. I noticed it every time. I started looking. Quietly. The way I look for sign in the woods. I went through Daddy's filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. It was a green metal steel case from 1968 that he bought at a state surplus auction for $9. The top drawer had every tax return he'd filed since 1971. The second drawer had every deed, every land record, every USDA cost share agreement he'd ever signed. The bottom drawer had what Mama used to call his important paper drawer, which was a manila accordion file held together with 2 rubber bands. I sat on the floor of the spare bedroom in my work pants, and I went through every paper in that accordion file. There were 47 separate documents. I read each one twice. There were birth certificates, marriage license, military discharge papers from a Korea-era stint that Daddy never talked about, the deed to the house, the deed to the land that Granddaddy had passed down in 1962, my mama's death certificate, Sister's vet records. Daddy kept the dog's vet records in the important paper drawer, which tells you everything you need to know about my daddy. What I did not find in that file was anything about the 400 acres being encumbered. Anything at all. No lease, no covenant, no easement, no conservation agreement. Nothing. I sat on the floor and I stared at the green steel case cabinet and I thought, Daddy, either you didn't do anything or you did something so quietly that the paper is somewhere else. Daddy didn't do quiet by accident. Daddy did quiet on purpose. Over the next 3 weeks, I drove out to that land alone 4 times. I walked the perimeter. I touched the old hand-painted Easterling sign Daddy nailed to the gatepost in 1972. I checked the brass survey monuments my granddaddy paid a surveyor to set in 1958. I walked the fire break that Daddy and I burned together every February for 22 years. I sat in the deer stand on the North Ridge where Daddy shot his last buck in 2018, an 8-point that he hung in the barn and butchered himself at 79 years old with hands that shook so bad he cut himself twice. On the fourth trip, I drove past our property line down the county road to a small ranch house in Petal, Mississippi, with a clean cement driveway and a 4-foot fishing rod laid across the front porch railing, and I knocked on the door of Mr. Sest. Eldon Pritchett. Eldon answered in a pair of jeans worn soft as flannel and a Mississippi Wildlife t-shirt. I'm pretty sure I gave my daddy in 1998. He took one look at me, and his eyes filled up, and he said, "Calvin, I've been waiting for you to come." Eldon Pritchett was 79 years old, retired director of the Pearl River Conservation Trust, a small regional nonprofit that protects bottomland hardwood and pine flatwoods across South Mississippi. He had been my daddy's fishing buddy since they were both 22 years old. They fished Black Creek every other Saturday morning for 57 years. Eldon had cataract surgery in 2019. My daddy drove him to it. Eldon's wife Patricia died in 2015. My daddy was a pallbearer. Eldon sat me down at his kitchen table. The table had a vinyl tablecloth printed with strawberries, the kind my mama used to use. He poured me coffee from a Mr. Coffee Maker into a chipped mug that said Talladega 1994. He went into a back room. He came out carrying a manila folder so old the edges had gone the color of weak tea. He laid it on the strawberries. He said, "Your daddy walked into my office on September 14th, 1983. You were 16 years old. Wendell was 12. I had been director of the trust for 2 years. Your daddy sat down in the chair across from my desk and he said, 'Eldon, I need you to write me a piece of paper, and I need it to outlive me.'" Eldon opened the folder. Inside was a 14-page typewritten document on cotton rag paper. It had been typed on Eldon's own IBM Selectric, the one he used until 2004. The signature at the bottom was my father's, in blue fountain pen, the same fountain pen he used to sign every birthday card I ever got from him. There was a wax seal embossed county notary stamp next to it. And underneath, in a section marked "Recorded," was a date stamp from the Forest County Chancery Clerk, Book 217, page 442. It was a 99-year recreational use lease. My father had leased the hunting, fishing, and recreational access rights to all 400 acres of family land to the Pearl River Conservation Trust for a term of 99 years, effective September 14, 1983, expiring September 14, 2082. Annual consideration, $1. What that means, in plain English, is this. For 99 years, no one can hunt, fish, log commercially, develop, or alter that land in any way without the written consent of the Pearl River Conservation Trust. The land can be sold. The title can change hands, but the encumbrance follows the land. It's recorded in the county. It is what real estate lawyers call a running covenant, and it's the kind of thing that turns a $1.2 million parcel into something nobody who knows what they're doing will pay more than $200,000 for, because they can't do anything with it except walk on it and look at it. My daddy signed that paper when Wendell was 12 years old. I asked Eldon why. I think I asked it twice. The first time my voice didn't work right. Eldon looked at me with watery old eyes and he said, "Your daddy knew what kind of boy Wendell was going to grow into, Calvin. He told me that day, sitting right where you're sitting." He said, "Eldon, my younger boy loves money the way some men love whiskey. And my older boy loves the land the way I do, and I'm not going to be here forever to keep them from each other. I have a hard time describing what it feels like to find out, at 58 years old, that your father read your brother's whole life by age 12, and then walked into a small office in Petal, Mississippi, and quietly built a fence around the thing he knew his younger son would come for. Eldon kept Daddy's phone number in his desk drawer for 40 years. He kept my phone number in his desk drawer for 22. He said, "Roy made me promise." He said, "If Wendell ever comes for that land, you call my older boy first, and you walk him through it." I sat at that strawberry tablecloth for a long time. Eldon poured me a second cup of coffee. He let me sit with it. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "Calvin, there's a second piece of paper." I looked up at him. He said, "Your daddy didn't just sign the lease. Your daddy also signed a letter on the same day, dated the same day, and he asked me to hold it in my safe until either he passed or someone came asking about the land. He told me which one was more likely to come first. He was right about that, too." Eldon went back into the back room. He came out with a smaller envelope, cream-colored. My daddy's handwriting on the front. It said, "To my son Calvin, read this in private." I drove home that night with the manila folder on the passenger seat of my truck and the letter inside the breast pocket of my work shirt. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the AC turned all the way up because I was sweating through my shirt. I did not call Wendell. I did not call Lila yet. I pulled off at a closed gas station outside Lumberton at 9 minutes past 10 at night, and I sat in the truck with the dome light on, and I opened the envelope. I am not going to read you the whole letter. Some things are between a son and his father. But I will tell you what was at the bottom of it. My daddy wrote, in blue fountain pen, in handwriting that had not changed in 60 years, Calvin. I knew what Wendell was when he was 8, and he burned down the shed and looked your mama in the eye and lied about it. I knew what you were, the day you were born. I have spent my whole life trying to be fair to both of you. Fairness is not the same thing as equal. I have left him things he can spend. I have left you the thing he cannot. I love you, son. Take care of the land. The land will take care of you back. That's how this works. Daddy, I sat in that truck at that closed gas station for 51 minutes. I did not cry. I read the letter 4 times. Then I folded it back up and I put it in the envelope and I put the envelope in the glove compartment and I drove home to my wife. I called Eldon back the next morning. From my own kitchen, with a fresh cup of coffee, my hands finally steady. I asked him one question. I said, "Eldon, has anybody from a Delaware hedge fund called the trust in the last 60 days asking about an encumbrance check on parcel 217442? Eldon was quiet for a long time. He said, "Calvin, the buyer's attorney called my successor 3 weeks ago. My successor is 34 years old, and his name is Garrett Tatum." Garrett told him the encumbrance was clear and active. The attorney did not relay that information to his client. I don't know why, I have a guess. His guess and mine were the same. The buyer's attorney was getting a kickback from Wendell. The closing was happening anyway, with the encumbrance hidden because the attorney was going to collect on both sides, and the hedge fund could sue later. Wendell almost certainly didn't know the criminal piece of it. Wendell just thought he had a buyer who was stupid and fast. I let the closing happen. I want you to understand why. If I stopped the closing, Wendell could spin a story. Wendell could say it was a misunderstanding, the buyer pulled out, the deal fell through. Oh well, no harm done. He could try again with someone else. He could come at me again in 6 months. The only way to end Wendell as a threat to that land was to let him stand on top of the deal in front of every person in our family and then watch the deal collapse under him. I called Garrett Tatum at the trust. I drove down to Petal, and I met him in the same little office where my daddy sat in 1983. Garrett was 34 years old and wore khakis and had a beard and looked nervous to meet me. I told him what I needed. I needed him to wait. I needed him to let the closing happen, and then on a specific Sunday, at a specific time, I needed Mockingbird Capital's general counsel to receive a registered letter from the trust, formally notifying the buyer of the encumbrance, and I needed that letter to be delivered in person by a Mississippi attorney to a specific location. Garrett looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Mr. Easterling, Eldon told me about you the day I got hired. He told me one day you'd come in and ask for exactly this. He said, 'When Calvin comes, do exactly what he says.'" I shook his hand. I drove home. Wendell called me on a Wednesday. He said, "Cal, we closed. The wire hit my account this morning. Daddy would be proud of us. I'm hosting a brunch at the Hattiesburg Country Club on Sunday. Family only. I want to give you your share in person. Reagan's putting together a slideshow." I said, "That sounds nice, Wendell. I'll be there." Have you ever set a boundary and watched someone completely unravel because you stopped being convenient? Stay with me. You're about to see one. The night before the brunch, I sat down with my daughter, Hannah. Hannah is 29. She's a physical therapist in Oxford. She has my mother's chin and my father's quiet, and she has known her Uncle Wendell her whole life as the uncle who shows up at Christmas, hands her a $50 bill, and asks her if she's dating anybody yet. I told Hannah, very simply, what was about to happen the next day. I told her I would not be raising my voice. I told her I would not be saying very much at all. I told her she might want to be ready to leave the room with her grandmother's biscuit recipe in her purse, because she might not get another invitation to that side of the family for a long time. Hannah looked at me across the kitchen table and she said, "Daddy, is Granddaddy in this somehow?" I said, "Baby girl, Granddaddy is in every inch of this." She started to cry. She said, "Good, he should be." Then I told Lila everything. I told her about the letter. I told her about the lease. I told her what I was going to do at the brunch. Lila cried for an hour, holding my hand across the kitchen table. Then she got up, she went into the bathroom, and she put on her good lipstick. Sunday came. The country club brunch was in a private dining room with a window looking out over the 18th green. There were 22 of us. Uncle Bo and Aunt Doreen drove up from Lucedale. My cousin Wade flew in from Birmingham. My daughter Hannah came with her husband Trevor. My wife Lila sat next to me with her hand on my knee under the tablecloth. Wendell stood up at the head of the table. He was wearing a navy blazer and a pink dress shirt and a tie clip shaped like a duck. Reagan had set up a tripod with a projector aimed at the back wall. There was a slideshow of our family land, drone footage. Wendell had paid somebody $800 to shoot, set to a Zac Brown band song. The first slide was a still shot of the gatepost with the hand-painted Easterling sign that my daddy nailed up in 1972. Wendell did not know that I had taken that photo myself in 2009 and given it to Daddy for his 70th birthday. Wendell had pulled it off Daddy's Facebook page without asking. He had pulled the photo I took of my dying father's land off the page. My father stopped updating in 2017. Wendell tapped his champagne glass with a butter knife. The room went quiet. He said, "Daddy left us something beautiful, and the most beautiful thing about it is what it lets us do for each other." He said, "Today I am proud to announce that Daddy's land has found a new chapter, and that chapter is going to take care of this family for a generation." He held up a check. He turned it toward me so the whole table could see. It was a cashier's check for $40,000, made out to me. He said, "Cal, my brother, my older brother, I want you to know I see you. I see how much that land meant to you. And this is just a small token of what we built together." He said the word together with his eyes closed. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I sipped my water and I looked at the door. The door opened. A man walked in. He was about 45 years old, in a charcoal suit with no tie, carrying a thin leather portfolio. He had the kind of haircut that costs $80 in Jackson and $200 in Atlanta. He looked at the room. He looked at Wendell. He looked at me. He didn't know which one I was, but he could tell from Wendell's face which one Wendell was. He said, "Mr. Easterling." I apologize for the interruption. "My name is Adam Coltrane. I am General Counsel for Mockingbird Capital Partners." "I need 30 seconds of your time." The room got very, very still. Wendell's face was already wrong. The blood was leaving it slowly, the way it leaves the face of somebody who has just realized which direction the truck is coming from. Adam Coltrane opened his portfolio. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. He said, "Mr. Easterling, my firm has just been informed of a recorded 99-year recreational use lease on the property at parcel 217442, executed September 14, 1983, between your father, Roy Easterling, and the Pearl River Conservation Trust." He said, "This encumbrance was not disclosed in the title commitment we received from your closing attorney. Mr. Easterling, my client is hereby exercising the rescission clause of the purchase agreement, effective immediately. We will be initiating clawback proceedings for the full purchase price plus damages, plus a referral to the Mississippi Bar Association regarding the conduct of the closing attorney, Mr. Ray Donovan Brennan." He laid the paper down on the table in front of Wendell's plate. Then, Aunt Doreen, my mother's older sister, 76 years old, who had been quietly buttering a biscuit while this happened, looked up at Wendell over her readers, and she said, in a voice loud enough for the back of the room to hear, "Wendell Lee, what in God's name did you do? Aunt Doreen reacting first is what told the whole table. That was the moment everyone understood. Wendell sat down because his legs didn't work anymore. Reagan turned off the projector. The Zac Brown Band song cut off mid-chorus. Adam Coltrane gave a small nod to the room, said, "Ma'am, sirs," and walked out the way he came in. The whole intervention had lasted under 2 minutes. I did not say anything. I folded my napkin, and I put it on my plate. Lila gathered her purse. Hannah stood up and walked over to Aunt Doreen and kissed her on the forehead. We walked out of that room in a single line, and I did not look at my brother once. In the parking lot, Aunt Doreen caught up to me. She put her hand on my forearm. She said, "Calvin, your daddy told me about the lease in 1991 at your mama's 50th birthday. He swore me to secrecy. I have kept that secret for 33 years. I am so glad I lived long enough to see today. I have not cried in front of my Aunt Doreen since I was 7 years old. I cried in front of my Aunt Doreen in that parking lot. She let me. She had a Kleenex in her purse already. She knew what kind of day Sunday was going to be. That was Sunday. By Tuesday, Mockingbird Capital had filed in federal court in Jackson for return of the full $1.2 million purchase price, plus $180,000 in earnest money damages, plus legal fees. Wendell's closing attorney, Donovan Brennan, was named as a co-defendant. The Mississippi Bar opened an investigation into Brennan within 9 days. Brennan, it turned out, had handled 3 other rural acreage deals in the prior 18 months, where buyers later discovered undisclosed encumbrances. 2 of those buyers were already in litigation. Brennan was disbarred provisionally by the end of October. By Friday of that first week, Reagan called Lila crying. It turned out that Reagan had co-signed the property tax filings for the land in 2023, using a power of attorney she had signed for Daddy that, it now appeared, Daddy had never actually signed. The signatures on the POA had been compared to Daddy's signatures on his bank records and his last will, and a forensic document examiner. The buyer's firm had retained as part of the rescission case had already submitted a preliminary report to the federal court. Forging a federal taxpayer document crosses a line the state of Mississippi alone doesn't get to handle. The FBI's white-collar division in Jackson opened a preliminary review the following Monday. By the end of the month, Wendell's employer, an agricultural chemical company headquartered in St. Louis with strict ethics clauses in the executive contracts, terminated him for cause. They revoked his pension vesting. He had been 4 years from full benefits. He had been with that company for 19 years. By the second week of October, Reagan filed for divorce. By the third week, she filed an addendum requesting that the court protect her from joint liability on the forgery claim, on the grounds that her husband had pressured her into signing without explaining what the document was. The court granted it provisionally. Reagan moved out of the Madison house and in with her sister in Brandon. Wendell called me late one night in November. It was 11 minutes past 10. I was on the front porch with the dog, a German Shepherd mix named Rooster. He was crying. He said, Cal. I didn't know about the lease. I swear to God I didn't know. Daddy never told me. Daddy never told anyone. I let him talk. I listened to my brother cry for a long time. When he was done, I said, Wendell, Daddy told me. He told me when I was 11. I just didn't understand what he was saying. Wendell said, what do you mean? I said, he told me he didn't own the land. He told me he belonged to it. He told me a 12-year-old boy didn't understand the difference. He said it sitting on a creek bank in July of 1977, and I'm 58 years old now, and I finally understand what he meant. He meant that you can't sell something that owns you, Wendell. He meant the land was already promised to itself. He meant that some of us are like the land, and some of us are like the men who try to sell it. And he knew which one you were before you were old enough to shave. Wendell didn't say anything. I said, Wendell, he left you everything else. The truck, the bank accounts, the mineral rights on the 20 acres in Smith County, which is the only piece of land we own that has any oil under it, the savings bonds Mama bought in the 80s. He left you $311,000 in cash and assets by the inventory the estate attorney sent me last month. That was not nothing. That was a life savings. That was 60 years of a quiet man putting money aside. He gave that to you. He left me a fence. Wendell said, why didn't he tell me about the lease? I said, because if he'd told you about the lease, you would have spent the last 40 years trying to find a way around it. And he loved you too much to let you spend your life doing that. Wendell said, "That doesn't sound like love." I said, "I know it doesn't. To you. That's the problem. I'm tired, Wendell. I'm going to bed. Good night." I hung up. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant after that phone call. I want to tell you I felt the satisfaction my brother always said I was too dull to feel. But I didn't feel any of that. I felt tired. I felt cleansed. I felt the way you feel when you finally put down something heavy you didn't realize you'd been carrying for 40 years. Hannah came over the next weekend with a slow cooker and a Pyrex of her grandmother's banana pudding. She did not mention her Uncle Wendell. She said, "Daddy, will you teach me to read sign on the land?" I said, "Baby, I've been waiting your whole life for you to ask me that." We drove out there together. I showed her the brass survey monument my granddaddy set in 1958. I showed her the fire break. I showed her where the bobwhite quail nest in the broom sedge. I showed her the bend in Black Creek where a smallmouth shadow moves a half second before he strikes. I showed her the gate post with the hand-painted Easterling sign. The sign needed paint. I told her I'd repaint it in the spring. She said, "Daddy, can I help?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, you can. The land is still there. The lease runs until 2082. By that time, I'll be long dead, and so will Wendell, and the trees my granddaddy planted in 1958 will be 24 years old, and somebody from the Pearl River Conservation Trust will still be walking that fence line twice a year because my daddy signed a piece of cotton rag paper in 1983 on an IBM Selectric in a small office in Petal, Mississippi. Garrett Tatum came out to the land with me 2 weeks ago. He's the one running the trust now. He brought a yellow notepad and a tape measure and a thermos of coffee. He had Eldon's old field bag, the one Eldon used for 40 years, slung over his shoulder. We walked the perimeter together. Garrett said, "Mr. Easterling, I want to keep doing this with you every year." I said, "Son, call me Calvin." And yes, I'll be here. I drove out there last Sunday morning by myself. I sat on the tailgate of my truck where the logging road meets Black Creek. The cicadas were so loud you could feel them in your jaw. The creek smelled like iron and leaf rot. A yellow fly landed on the back of my neck, and I crushed it without looking, the way my daddy crushed one on my shoulder in July of 1977. And I sat there, and I cried like a small child for about 20 minutes. Then, I drank my coffee. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. Peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from standing on something solid and knowing somebody who loved you put it under your feet a long time before you needed it. Real love does not test you to prove you deserve it. Real love builds a fence around you and doesn't tell you it's there. Sometimes the people who protect you aren't standing in front of you. Sometimes they walked into a small office 40 years ago wearing a clean denim shirt and they signed something on cotton rag paper and they never said a word about it. I tell one of these stories every night. Some nights I sit out on the porch with Rooster and I wonder if anybody out there is listening. Then I read the comments and I see that somebody is. There's another one waiting for tomorrow night. There's no shortage of these stories, and that is the saddest thing about all of this. If you could protect one thing in your life, a place, a person, a promise, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this one stayed with you, the story on your screen right now is for you. It's about a daughter named Reese who thought she'd have to fight her remarried mother in court for her father's 84 acres, and the senior deputy clerk who had been quietly keeping her phone number in a desk drawer for 3 years. Tap the card. I'll see you there.